Hey everyone, and welcome back to Vertical Playpen, the podcast all about adventure and experiential education. And in the episode today, I'm going to be learning or relearning some advice from a book that I recently remembered I had. And that book is Silver Bullets, a very classic adventure activity book that many of you probably have on your bookshelves. But how often do we actually go to the front matter, remind ourselves of the words and the wisdom that is in the front matter of these books? Well, I'm going to read the front matter of this book to you all, and we'll go through it step by step. So let's see what tips we have in store. Okay, so I want to give credit to Karl Rohnke. Karl Rohnke had a big impact in the adventure industry, working for both Project Adventure and then also being one of the founders of High Five Adventure. The book Silver Bullets is a very iconic book in the industry. More than likely you have it. There are plenty of activities you cannot play anymore, you can't get away with anymore, but there's still some in here that you might find that you still find useful. I happen to have a signed copy. This is pride and place on my bookshelf behind me, and it's often worthwhile, I find, going back to some of the older books that I'd read maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago and just kind of rereading them and seeing if there's anything that's still relevant in there today. What I really like about Carl's style of writing books is it was very conversational. He used to throw in a lot of humor into his books. But in this section that I'm going to read from, it's the introduction to the game section, and there are 8 play pointers. And I read through them and I found like, wow, this is still incredibly relevant. And there's some helpful advice here. So I'm going to go through the 8 play pointers and add a little bit of my own commentary to each one of them. So play pointer number 1 is don't just explain, involve yourself in the activity. You don't have to play every game, but be ready to personalize the game with your person. Get in there and mix it up with the players. I really, really like this, especially the line personalize the game with your person. It's often something I try to emulate and reflect in when I'm leading activities or when I'm teaching people activities, is that I want to actually be engaged in the play. I often make the statement when I'm teaching activities that if you don't like an activity I lead, then you don't have to use it, and it actually would encourage you not to use it because you won't be able to authentically act and role model playfulness in that activity. So if you ever see me play activities, then I'm normally involved in them. It's only like problem solving activities, maybe where I step back and observe the group, but I'm still adding commentary as I see stuff, still engaging with conversation. I'm just not an active participant in that activity. So I think this is a really important one. Don't just explain, involve yourself. And I think that you role modeling the behavior and playing at the start or throughout, that energy that you create really sets the example for the rest of the day, the rest of the activities. And play is very engaging. So I encourage you to play. Okay, number 2, keep the rules to a minimum. Wordy explanations lead to pre-game boredom. I think it was in a previous episode where I was talking to Salvatore Manzi on communication, the art of communication. If you haven't heard that episode, head back and listen to that one. It's a really good one. He talks about how we as humans have the attention span of about 3 to 5 minutes in terms before we need to have something changed to capture our engagement. And so it means that when you're thinking about your rules of your activities, trying to keep your activities within that frame, not certainly not going over that, is really, really important. I often find that newer facilitators kind of over explain because they're trying to remember all the rules of the activities and they might forget and then they go back and it just ends up being a jumble of mess. And I would rather people just explain the rules and get them wrong and then just play than get them right but spend an absolute age to get to their point. So try to keep it short and yeah, just engage and play. There's one other thing that I thought I'd mention here is that sometimes I'll get, if there's an activity where there are a lot of rules and that can be overwhelming and confusing, sometimes people don't, someone might ask the question like, hey, Phil, can you re-explain the rules again? What I will tend to do is in that moment, just say, if at this stage you're still unclear on the rules, just know that you're going to go out in this activity a little sooner than you'd like. But I think what will happen is they'll learn through the process and it won't bore everyone else who understands the rules. So playing is probably more important than making sure that everyone understands exactly what we're going to do, especially on a shorter activity where you can repeat it if necessary. Number 3 is bend some rules occasionally or change a few as fits the players and the situations. This one really aligns, and I'm going to throw in a plug to another book, a book that I helped author called Tinker, Building Purposeful Experiences from Classic Adventure Activities. And what the intention around that book was to encourage people, rather than getting good at like 100 activities and knowing 100 activities, you get really, really good and dialed in on maybe 10 and can adapt them and change them dependent on the group that you work with. So I think that that's really important, understanding all the parts of an activity you can play around with and tweaking them to fit any group. And that will allow you to work with larger groups, smaller groups. Sometimes I get the question of like, how do you work with 500 or how do you work with only 5? And typically it just means you're changing the parameters of activities you're going to run. And it might be the same activities. You can just tend to work with them. Either maybe it works in pairs and you get to be a participant, or maybe you need to step away and let other pairs work with each other. There are a lot of opportunities to bend activities and change them. And so this really aligns with the book Tinker. The backstory on that book is that when we were coming up with it, we wanted to actually just write an activity book, and we were going to list like 25 of our favorite activities. And what we found was if I had an activity and a colleague had the activity, it's the same name. When we wrote out the description, we found out there was variations and they weren't exactly the same. So that led us to the idea of like, oh, actually, there's something in the fact that we can tinker and adapt. That's more important than writing out another book of activities. So pick out Tinker, and that will help you out there. The link is in the description. 4, don't run a good game into the ground. 3 straight class periods of any game in the section is boring. That's why some students don't like archery or badminton or anything that was required too many weeks in a row. I think that it's really good to have a repertoire of activities and know many that you can change and go to so you're not repeating them. It's also helpful for your own sanity if you're not doing the same activities all the time, so feel free to change them and come up with new ones. What I think is important with this is sometimes I'll get participants who will ask me to play the same game again. Like, oh, can we play that one again? They have a memory of the first time they experienced it, which was really enjoyable. If they play it again, it may not be as enjoyable. It becomes a little stagnant. So it's still viable to play activities more than once, especially if there's still interest in the group. But most of the time, I just move on to something new because I've got something else to show. And an essential component of adventure activities for me is the unique and novel experience. So if you're repeating them over and over again, it's no different than if you pulled out a soccer ball and started playing soccer. People know it and they might enjoy it, but others don't. So you might as well just play something new and you'll capture the attention of other people in your group. Number 5, keep the players playing. Don't include or evolve rules that permanently eliminate participants. I go back and forth on this one a little bit because I think there's benefit in challenge that is competition based and creates losers. I think competition is good, and I think understanding how to lose is a really important skill for development of any age. What I've found though is if you want to engage people still, then allowing there to be something else for them to do if they go out is helpful. So that might be entourage based ones where they cheer on somebody if they go out, or it might be that they become a distractor and their role changes when they go out and they're trying to distract someone to make a mistake. That adds a little bit of difference to the activity and can keep people engaged. And the one other component I would just say on this is observation can be participation. I think sometimes that's like demeaned, but if someone goes out and they just watch, it's actually kind of enjoyable to watch people participate in an activity, even if you went out. 6, pick teams that are fair. Don't use the disastrous sociogram method for choosing sides, i.e. asking two students to pick their own teams. Yeah, as was I kind of explained that or read that, I think we all had a visceral response to moments where we've been that person who hasn't been picked or gets picked last because maybe they're not in the cliquey social group that's getting to pick. There are so many different ways to pick groups. Number 7, play games that allow as much of a 50-50 male-female split as possible. Most sports generally demand a sex split, and there's enough of that. These games can be played as well by either sex. And I think that that's really important because Adventure activities really trying to create belonging and inclusivity and accessibility. And if we're limiting participation in lots of different variations, that is obviously not ideal. And I appreciate that even in 1984, when this was written, there was that mindset of ensuring that the games are accessible to all. Number 8, emphasize competition against self when competition seems natural. Trying to beat a time established by your own team or attempting to smash a nebulous world record is great fun with none of the second place next time symptoms of the loser syndrome. Yeah, I always like the idea if you're going to do a time challenge of having them try to beat their own times because there's a more accessible, clear goal that you're trying to beat. I'll always get the question like, what was the fastest time you've ever seen? My go-to response is always like the fastest time I've ever seen today. And that might get a little bit of eye rolls, but I think that it's important to have those kind of goals that are more enjoyable for them to try to beat their own beating themselves, that rather than like, oh yeah, when I worked with the Boston Bruins, they were able to achieve this. Well, they're physically more probably able than the majority of people participating, so that's not fair. So it ends up not working in your favor to have these targets. I think about that as well with like climbing. It's a sort of different thing, but if you're on a climbing tower, not having like fastest times, partly because it's unsafe for you to keep up, belaying with that, but also it means that like when a new person comes, if the task is too hard, then they don't see themselves fitting in with that world. And so it's harder for them to actually engage in the activity. So I think about that with trying to beat their own times. So I'm going to go back through those real quick so you have like a reminder of the 8, and we'll go from there. So thank you for listening. Play pointers. Number 1, don't just explain, involve yourself in the activity. You don't have to play every game, but be ready to personalize the game with your person. Get in there and mix it up with the players. 2, keep the rules to a minimum. Wordy explanations lead to pre-game boredom. 3, bend some rules occasionally or change a few as fits the players and the situations. Don't run a good game into the ground. 3 straight class periods of any game in the section is boring. That's why some students don't like archery or badminton or anything that's required too many weeks in a row. Apologies to also archery and badminton fans. Number 5, keep the players playing. Don't include or evolve rules that permanently eliminate participants. Number 6, pick teams that are fair. Don't use the disastrous sociogram method for choosing sides, i.e. asking 2 students to pick their own teams. Number 7, play games that allow as much of a 50-50 male-female split as possible. Number 8, emphasize competition against self when competition seems natural. So those are 8 play pointers by Karl Rohnke from the book Silver Bullets. And if you have a book that you're interested in hearing my commentary on, maybe I can grab some front matter from that. Let me know. And thank you for listening to me talk about play pointers.